Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's session on diversity, equity, and inclusion, an investment industry imperative. I'm Wendy John, Head of Global Diversity and Inclusion at Fidelity Investments, and it's my pleasure to moderate today's conversation with this panel of esteemed leaders whose work in the investment industry shows their career-long dedication to the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm joined by Dana Emery, Chief Executive Officer and President of Dodge & Cox, Gilbert Garcia, Managing Partner, Garcia Hamilton and Associates, LP, Keith Lee, President, Chief Investment Officer and Senior Portfolio Manager, Brown Capital Management, and John Rogers Jr., Founder, Chairman, Co-Chief Executive Officer, and Chief Investment Officer of Ariel Investments. Welcome to you all. This is such an urgent topic that I know it's top of mind for all of us. And as a reminder to our attendees, please be sure to use the Q&A and chat features to interact with us and each other throughout the session. So let's get started. So as David rightfully said, the lack of diversity in the investment industry is certainly not news. Still, between the COVID pandemic and the social unrest we've seen across the country this year, there's now greater awareness and focus in the media and by the regulators. John, I want to start with you. What are your thoughts on why diversity, equity, and inclusion has been such a challenge for the investment industry? And would you share whether you're sensing anything different in the conversation today?
Well, thank you. It's really a great honor to be here today. And I think when starting the last point, I am feeling more and more optimistic. We're starting to feel like people are interested in working with minority-owned money managers, I think for the first time. And I'm finding more and more people are calling and wanting advice on finding diverse talent, both for their executive suites and for their boards. And then finally, Congress is the most progressive Congress in history. And when you have Joyce Beatty running the Diversity and Inclusion Committee of the House Financial Services Committee, and you have Maxine Waters as the chairman, and they're regulating so much the financial services industry, they're putting real solid pressure to make change, and they have subpoena power. And so I start to feel like that leadership roles that those dynamic women have positioned themselves is really, really making a difference. I think the challenges for why the industry has been so bad for so long, I go back to when I got started in 1980. I was the first African-American financial advisor, stockbroker at William Blair and Company, first Black professional they had. And all of us on the call know, and all the folks that are listening today know, that to be successful in financial services, often you need to be able to generate revenue. You've got to bring in customers. But because of the historic discrimination that we face and racism in this country, and the fact that when you don't live next to people in the same community where people are CEOs and CFOs of major companies, where there's multi-generational wealth that's been created, we don't have that network. We don't have that access to be able to have the ability to really build the deep relationships that we need to be able to generate revenue and bring in business. So I think that is a real key issue. The second real key issue is there's still a lot of implicit and unconscious bias. And we all know this. We've all talked about it a lot. But people think about minority firms and minority leadership often in the terms of supplier diversity, which is a term that's 40 years out of date and should be retired. But when people think about African-American entrepreneurs, they often think about us in construction, catering, janitorial services, which are important career paths. But we all know the wealth and jobs and power are in financial services, professional services, and technology. So I think we have to fight this implicit and unconscious bias where people don't see us as financial executives. So those would be two of the reasons why I think we continue to have real difficulties, but I am hopeful that things are starting to go in the right direction.
Yeah, that's fantastic, John. You provide really great context for where we've been and where we're headed. So we all know it's really important, the role of the fiduciary. And so what some of us have heard is that some fiduciaries believe that they're required to primarily focus on performance in the absolute. So Gil, I wanted to ask you, I know you're very passionate about this. What is the role of the consultant in advising the fiduciaries around diversity?
Sure, thank you. And thank you for having me. This is a real treat for me and a real treat for my firm. We are Garcia, Hamilton and Associates, located in Houston. We manage a little over 16 billion, and we're probably the largest Hispanic firm in the country. I do want to do one tag on to John, which is I feel a big groundswell. It's up to us, though, to sort of, as John would say, put it through the hoop. Not only the things he said, Congress, but there's activity in a lot of the state houses. And of course, one of the biggest elections of all time is happening in California right now, which is Prop 16, which is to essentially overturn the anti-affirmative action Prop 209, which had devastating results on the minority community in both jobs, small businesses, and education. And so there's just a lot of activity happening. And in the SEC itself, I happen to sit on one of the committees for the SEC advisory committees, and that's one of our main topics, which is diversity and inclusion. If you go back to the consultants, there's one thing is do the right thing, and the other is do the smart thing. If you think about do the right thing, the first step about there is if you look at the consulting community, if you look at the largest 100, which is according to P&I, the largest 10 have about 80% market share. That's $30 trillion in the hands of 10 companies. The largest 20 have 93% market share. So that's essentially the entire market. And some of those large firms are the most egregious at essentially the unconscious bias and conscious bias to minority and women-owned firms. And I would make the case that a lot of them it is so bad that they are unwilling to be transparent in their own data about themselves and about their own workforce, the diversity among their own workforce, the diversity in the managers, and just even outright transparency. And I think Michael Friedrichs, the treasurer of Illinois, said it best recently to the SEC when he said, we can only assume that this refusal, the refusal to provide transparency, is embedded in either their embarrassment or deceit. So that's the one hand. On the smart business hand, it's really simple. If you look, the consultant's job is to source performance for their clients. And I happen to be a trustee in Dallas. And it might be brand X, Y, and Z, but it might not be. But their full job should be to source alpha wherever it is. And we have good people and qualified, very good firms in the minority community. So I suggest they serve their clients well, because many of them are not today, and cast the broadest net possible, regardless of how much effort it might take them, to find alpha wherever it is.
Well, we know you're passionate about this, Gil, for sure. I'm glad to have you sharing your perspective and really, hammering that point home.
Thank you.
So, no, thank you. So just a question, because we know that everyone is not fully aligned. How do we respond to the non-believers, those who don't perceive the lack of diversity in the industry to be a problem? Keith, would you like to weigh in on that question?
Certainly. But first, let me also thank you, Wendy, and thank IAA for having us today and talk about such a timely and important topic. That's a difficult question for me, only because, we've been in this, our firm is 6 months behind John. So Brown Capital Management, we just celebrated our 37th anniversary. In July, and John started at the beginning of the year. We've been dealing with this from the beginning, right? Where we've been told that, diversity, it's not real. We have non-believers. I'm tired of trying to sway the non-believers and would rather focus on those who do believe, particularly, as Gil and John said, with the groundswell that we have. And I can talk about all the benefits that having diverse managers, we've all have seen them, the benefits that brings to the table for companies. But let me not use my own words. Let me quote what a Stanford University study said. Diversity, in fact, is not only a moral obligation, it is a fiduciary one, leading to fewer losses and better performance. Ultimately, increasing diversity among fund managers will require both shifting mindsets about who can and who should participate in generating financial capital and broad and deep systemic change in the policies and practices of the entire industry. So I guess at the heart of that, at the heart of your question, people have to change. And I think in order to change, people have to recognize the history as John laid out, but also the practices that continue. And, I think it's difficult to not move forward without addressing those and, seeing that this is a real benefit to their clients, and then therefore the changes should be made.
Great.
Can I add something to that, Wendy, real quick?
Sure.
This is Gilbert. I think what's important, in addition, is those who don't believe, all you got to do is look at the data. The data is clear. There is something unusual and unnatural about women and minorities having very few spots in the partnerships and senior positions of all these great firms that are driving this economy in this country. And if you look at what's happening in this country today, when people see all this social unrest, one of the big problems, really the root of lack of education, lack of healthcare and everything else really comes from income inequality. And that's something that we all need to work towards to solve, because the income inequality in this nation has become staggering. And again, there are good people in our community. And so it is not a supply problem at all.
Absolutely. Well, we happen to have one of those women leaders. And so, Dana, I'd love to hear from you. We've talked a little bit about the history in the industry. We've talked about the fiduciary and the role of the consultant, the naysayers. And now, could you tell us a little bit about what you're hearing from clients?
First, I'd like to echo the thanks that everyone has expressed for the IAA and Wendy leading this panel, as well as the other participants. This is a really important topic, and I'm happy to be participating. Dodge & Cox is an independent asset manager based in San Francisco with about $300 billion in assets under management, in existence for 90 years. And diversity, equity, and inclusion has always been a key part of our culture. And I'm very happy to be here representing our firm. What we're hearing from clients, I'm encouraged, as John said, and others already expressed, that this has become more front and center. And so I'm very encouraged that we're starting to get even more questioning. We've always gotten questions about our organizational structure and our culture, but we're getting a lot more questions about our DE&I efforts at Dodge & Cox. And so I think that's very encouraging, because it's really about building awareness and transparency on the topic. And so I would say the questions are around, one, whether DE&I is a priority at the firm, whether senior leadership is engaged in the efforts, whether you have formal committees and processes around this, and whether there's specific goals and priorities created at the firm. There's also questions about what we're doing to create an inclusive environment, employee training in the areas such as unconscious bias, how we provide and give feedback, how we do career planning. So really around attracting and retaining top talent at the firm. We're increasingly getting pressured for greater data transparency, and we embrace this. I think we show well in terms of relative to the industry. I'm not calling it success, I'm calling it a journey, and we need to continue to make these efforts, but a lot more requests for data transparency regarding gender and racial diversity of all employees, but also in key investment decision-making roles, leadership roles, and the overall employee base. They ask a lot of questions around recruiting, as I mentioned, and we've been doing a lot of work at our firm around where we're posting for jobs, where we're recruiting for jobs, how we're describing jobs, so to make sure that we can attract diverse talent. We're broadening out the different clubs and organizations, so we get a lot of questions there about where we're finding talent. We tend to hire early in the career at Dodge & Cox. And then we get a lot of questions about what we're doing to support the industry as a whole. Are we highlighting this issue? Are we speaking at conferences? And are we members of various industry groups that are trying to promote and attract top talent to our overall industry? And lastly, I would say we get a lot of questions about our involvement in the community, which has always been a key part of Dodge & Cox since its founding, and where our community efforts are in terms of volunteerism and charitable giving to support opportunity and equity in our society.
Great, thank you. So it's good to know that clients are starting to ask questions and really drive that conversation. So I want to pivot a little bit. Many of us have probably seen the recent statements from endowments on their diversity efforts. So John, I know this is near and dear to your heart. You've been incredibly active in this space. Could you share more about your engagement and why we're seeing all of these recent statements about the level of diversity from endowments?
Well, I think that we're getting improvements in the endowments for a couple of reasons. One is that there's a group, Diversified Asset Management Initiative, that's run by Robert Rabin. He's been putting a lot of pressure on them. Reverend Sharpton has gotten very involved, and also Congressman Cleaver and Congressman Kennedy sent letters to the top 20 endowments in the United States, really asking them questions about their diversity and inclusion efforts. And as you know, most of the major universities in this country have never had a Jackie Robinson moment. They've never had a Black or brown person touch a dime of the money, either on staff or the outside money manager they're hired. And it's shocking because, as we all know, most universities and museums and foundations have very visible stated commitments to community. My father always brought me up as a former Tuskegee Airman. He taught me you always live up to the commitments that you make to others. And these institutions, again, have these public commitments about diversity and inclusion, but when it comes to their crown jewel, the endowment, they find ways to not be inclusive. And I think it's really heartbreaking because you think about all the Black and brown students who go to these great universities working to get ahead, and then they don't have a chance to fully participate in our capitalist democracy. So it is a real problem, but I think it is starting to move in the right direction because you can't always, the final thing, it goes back to that supplier diversity issue. If I've had this conversation with at least a dozen university presidents and asked them flat out, what are you doing to support minority business? They always say, when we construct our next building, we're going to have 20% set aside for minority construction firms. And I always tell those presidents, that's the modern day Jim Crow. The Black and brown people do the catering, and the white guys get to do the private equity, venture capital, hedge funds, long only, fixed income, and the rest. And that's morally wrong. And as John Lewis said, you see something that's morally wrong, something that's unfair, we have a responsibility to speak out and fight for the moral right solution to the problem. So it has been disappointing, but it's moving in the right direction and getting more and more optimistic.
And Wendy, some of these foundations and endowments, they're the ones behind this whole they're very supportive of ESG. And my view is, before they can talk to any manager about ESG, they should ask that manager themselves, how do you score as an ESG entity? Because it's not just about my investments, it's about you, the manager. Are you promoting women and minorities in your firm? Do you have women and minorities on your board? So before you can even claim to be an ESG manager, are you ESG yourself?
And Wendy, if I might, and again, as has been said, I think the groundswell is important, but I'm not interested in what these institutions are going to do just over the next 6 months or over the next year. These issues have been with us forever and a day. It's what will their sustained commitment be to including minority-owned firms over the next year, 10 years, 20 years. They know the studies, they know the statistics. So it's a matter of intentions. And, so will they have a sustained commitment to their intentions of doing what's right and doing actually what's in their best interest longer term?
And I should say, there have been some leaders for a long time. The Knight Foundation has done great work in this area. University of Chicago for a long time has been a role model for universities. And we can think of a few others, but those two just stand out, who are not just getting religion today, but have had it for quite a long time.
And
Absolutely.
it's not a coincidence that the foundation endowments are dominated by one or two very large consulting firms that are some of the most egregious at not evaluating and even considering women and minority-owned firms.
Yeah, absolutely. So interestingly enough, I think we could all say that in recent years, there's been a focus and progress, demonstrated progress, engaging more women in the investment industry, although there's still more to do. And so, Dana, you have a unique position on the panel in terms of being able to speak about the types of actions that really have made a difference. And so where are there some additional opportunities to engage women and all women? Because there's a question in Q&A that talks about, the progress most visibly hasn't necessarily demonstrated progress for diverse women. So whether that be Black, Latinx, or Asian, and what lessons might we take from our efforts to engage women that we could extend into other underrepresented groups?
Yes, I mean, I was planning to address this more from how do you engage women once you've attracted them. But of course, I'm assuming that you are really improving your recruiting efforts to make the strong case for the industry, the important purpose of the industry, and the fact that this can be a wonderful place for diverse talent to make a rewarding career. And so I think that that assumes that you're really pushing on the recruiting and having a diverse pipeline and bringing in people of diverse backgrounds. And then I think once you have the diverse talent and you've attracted them and encouraged them to accept, and working on obviously creating an inclusive environment where people can thrive is really crucial to this. I would say that we at our firm, we really say the onus is on everyone. We all together are creating a diverse environment, and we are all kind of watchdogs in the sense of really making sure that we have that. We've implemented several things. One, we think the manager plays a key role in this, in mentoring their employees. We believe really strongly in really formal periodic deep dive discussions with employees, but also sort of in the moment management, where you see people doing well and where you see people that might need some constructive feedback. So really mentoring employees and helping them achieve success and make sure they're the most effective that they can be. And I think that we try to emphasize internally that this is a two-way street, that the employees need to seek the feedback, be open to the feedback, and that the managers and others need to provide it. And that's all in the best interest of the culture and in the long-term success in achieving our mission. The other thing that we would encourage is an overall formal mentorship program at the firm where it's volunteer-based. We don't like to force it, but we think relationships are better if it's more volunteer-based. But encouragingly, we've had really enthusiastic take-up of our formal mentorship programs, and we try to do it outside the department so that there's a great sounding board away from sort of the pressures of the existing department, but allowing them to have sort of unbiased and trusting relationships with people across the firm. We also encourage our employees to have a broader industry network, really build their network so they have a trusted and knowledgeable people to talk to in the industry that may help them, obviously with non-confidential information, but really just make sure that they start to develop those relationships where they can bounce ideas and get feedback outside the firm, away from overall firm pressure. I feel like I've personally benefited from mentors, both internal and external of the firm, and I really attribute a lot of my success to the advice I've received over the years. I think that one of the things we've also implemented is external coaching and 360 reviews. I think that's where the employee gets some good feedback, where maybe people are too shy to share. You hope that's not the case, but sometimes it is. And we develop action plans so that our employees can continue to develop. And I would say that, with women, and sometimes when people feel like they're I don't like to stereotype, so I have to be really careful, but I would just say that I think what we try to encourage people to share their views, lean in, take a risk, advocate. And we do that with all of our employees. But if people are hesitant, we make sure that we're mentoring them to give them that confidence to share their views. We do everything at Dodge & Cox in teams, so there's a great deal of visibility for people. And we encourage all of our employees, obviously, to be very well prepared to advocate their views. We only get the best out of group decision making if we have a trusting and safe environment where debate can happen. And we all work together to try to encourage that. And that would apply to women and people from diverse backgrounds as well. So I think that really it's a group effort, and we have to constantly ask ourselves, are we achieving our goals? And then seek feedback from our employees through different surveys and ongoing conversations to make sure we're continuing to try to get better in this regard. So we're not saying we're perfect, but we have a continuous learning mindset.
Yeah, I think, Dana, you shared a few things that really resonate with me. I think especially the idea that everyone is accountable for creating that inclusive environment. And I think you gave us some real tips for how everyone can participate in that. And we know that mentorship and advocacy is an important factor, particularly for underrepresented groups coming into these environments. So with that in mind, the industry has significant progress to make in hiring talent that better represents the diverse customers that we serve. And many of the traditional recruiting methods that we use do not reach the diverse candidates pools or the underrepresented groups that we're trying to recruit. So Gil, I know you're full of passion. So tell us a little bit of what are some creative approaches that firms might consider when building those pipelines of talent. You already told us it's not a supply issue. So how do firms connect to that supply?
Sure. There's sort of the obvious, and then there's the hard thing. So let's talk about the obvious. There's no doubt there are quality African-American and Hispanic students at the Ivy League schools, but there's equally and maybe even more talented African-American Hispanic kids at the traditional Black colleges and Morehouse, Spelman, some of the colleges in the Southwest, Arizona State and others. The key is go where they are and find them. And if you really can't find them, there's many organizations you can partner with, like SEO, which got me in the business, that finds undergraduates and puts them in investment banking, et cetera. There's many organizations out there that you can partner with to help you. And when you find them, of course, you got to set them up. You got to mentor them. You got to retain them. You got to promote them. You got to pay them, all those things. But let me take a step back, because in my view, that's the easy stuff. It's over here, that's what's the hard part. It's an honest, hard assessment of where are you. And don't be upset if the numbers are terrible. The key is to set a baseline. Where are we with women and minorities in key positions? And of course, when you go up, it gets worse in the levels of the company. And the key is to set a goal over a period of time, not a numerical goal, but a goal of what we can do to improve. It's a tone at the top that has to be set by the CEO or the leaders that comes down. And you've got to tie their compensation to the improvement in that whole effort. And let me tell you, I know some of these CEOs, when I hear someone say, and we're going to go from 3% African Americans partners to 6 in the next 5 years or 10 years, I understand, but you know what? Let me tell you what I hear. What I hear is the non-diverse community has a pass, because they're going to be 97% for a long time, and they're going to be 94% for even longer. In other words, you got to look at these numbers and reverse them to what they're really saying. Because at the end of the day, there are quality women, there are quality African Americans and Hispanics, and let them be wherever they fall in the process. And I guarantee you there'll be way more than those numbers, and the firms will be stronger, more competitive, and more profitable for it. So there's the easy stuff. Go find them, train them, retain them, and there's the harder thing. Set the right tone at the top and make people accountable.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gil. So we're getting some questions about specific practices. So maybe Keith, you could share what types of outward reaching activities or steps are you taking at your firm, or maybe recommendations for others?
So Brown Capital Management, as I mentioned, was formed in 1983, 37 years ago, by our founder, Eddie Brown. And Eddie, from the beginning, and it's exact things that Gil and Dana were talking about. Eddie, from the beginning, was intentional about having a diverse firm. That was important to him. And so he utilized his, I'm telling my age and the age of the firm, his Rolodex, right? His contacts, to reach out to people who were in the business or who at schools or in programs like TWIGA. We've utilized SEO, those types of firms. We've gone to HBCUs, looking for undergraduates when we said we wanted to expose, nurture, and train people right out of undergraduate and introduce them to the business. So we've done all of those things. And, it really is about intention, right? It really is about the head of the organization setting the expectations, setting the expectation in the culture that we're not going to just try this. This is what we're going to do, and then to do it. And but it's done every day. It's one thing to get minorities into a firm, but it's also another to create a culture that is inclusive, so that they're not looking over their shoulder. Oh my gosh, why am I being looked at in this way? Where they feel like their contribution is just as good, just as valuable as anyone else's. And that's not always easy, unfortunately, at a lot of firms. And then the ultimate is, or a continuation of that is, fairly promoting people, fairly compensating based upon their abilities and based upon their contribution. And we talked about all the biases, unconscionable, conscionable, or otherwise. It's eliminating those aspects of the culture where people can come in and through training and through mentoring and through sponsorship, where they can achieve what non-minorities have been achieving in this industry. We don't have that, but we have to ensure that that is the case.
And Wendy, people need to recognize that it's not a natural path in our communities for young people to say, I want to go to Wall Street, or I want to start my money management firm. There has to be an understanding of that. I mean, my parents didn't go to college. They have no retirement. So, Wall Street, stocks and bonds, all those things were a million miles away. And as a normal Latino family that wants to do better, what did they want me to be? A doctor or a lawyer? Because that's all they know. And so that's why a lot of us, and look, John Rogers is the king at this, right? He's had summer internships for a long time. Our firm started that a few years ago as well. We have 20 interns every summer, and they're either all women or minorities. And we don't put them in the filing closet. They're there on the trading floor, they're participating there with our clients, they're hearing presentations, because in our view, they need the exposure. And if the industry, which like other successful industries, wants to keep out people or have barriers of entry, if they won't educate our youth, we will.
And Wendy, if I might just add on to that, one of the things that we also do, we're in Baltimore City, and there are a lot of great organizations that mentoring, helping to develop, particularly minority students. And we have them into the office as an introduction to what we do at times. And it's amazing the feedback that we get, or that we've gotten over the years. In some cases, a lot of minority students, particularly African Americans, haven't seen that many African Americans in business. And it's the impression that leaves. It makes a difference.
So I guess I would jump in and say quickly, a couple of things that, Ariel has had the Ariel Community Academy for 25 years. It's a small public school where we teach the kids to invest in the stock market with real money. Kids come down to our offices, as an example that Keith gave, and see people that look like them picking stocks, doing research. And we hope that creates a whole cadre of young African Americans who get into the financial services industry. And we've had several who've graduated and been interns at Ariel, full-time employees at Ariel, and then are in the industry in one way or another. The second thing I tell people to do is, I think every financial services company can partner with an urban public school in the way that we have, and it would be a good model. The other thing we try to do is stay close to our local university that we happen to love, the University of Chicago, where I went to the high school there and I'm vice chairman of the board, and we have several of us that went to the university. And so we built deep relationships with the college and the Booth School. And like 4 years ago, we created a program for minority students to get paid internships to work in the investment offices of major endowments. And the idea was, to Gilbert's point, a lot of diverse talent comes to the University of Chicago and they think about going to work in traditional banking. They don't know about private equity and hedge funds and venture capital and mutual funds and the like. So we thought the best place for them to learn would be within an endowment office. And that program's gone off to a great start. We think we'll have 17 students next year placed. And then the final quick thing is just something that's come up a couple times already, but this idea of mentorship. I can just think of a couple of quick examples. When Melody Hobson interned at Ariel, when she was 17 years old, 19 years old or what have you, I remember that same summer I was visiting T. Rowe Price and Jack Laporte and looking at the stock and lamenting, like I often do. I said, Jack, I don't see any diversity here. And he said, we can't find anyone. Well, I said, I've got a terrific summer intern who went to Princeton like you did, and maybe you can hire her next summer. And so in a way, by me looking out for Melody, she ended up getting to work for T. Rowe Price, and they trained her and got her ready for our industry when she joined when we left. And I could give many examples like that, but I think it's so important that when we have these young people, that you're helping to look out for their next job and their next career opportunity and set them up and have them meet the people they need to meet. Final thing I'd say is we're really proud of the top 2 African Americans in Northern Trust Bank, first 2 to ever be on the management committee. Both started their careers as summer interns at Ariel, and we stayed involved in their careers as time went on. And we're just really proud of the kind of success they've been able to have.
That is tremendous, John. Wendy, 2 of our interns are now partners at my firm.
Yeah.
They were interns 10 years ago, and now they're partners here.
Yeah.
Same with Dodging Packs. We've had tremendous success with our internship program, making sure there's diverse talent there. And we have many what we call shareholders in our firm that came through that program, as well as starting out maybe as research associates at our firm and more entry level, where we've been able to attract a lot of diverse talent that have gone on either to have successful roles in our firm or other firms across the industry. So really want to emphasize the importance of helping attract talent to our industry and giving them those opportunities to have exposure, either through internships or through educational sessions, as John was saying, or through just different sponsorships of community groups that are focused in this area of creating opportunity for people from diverse backgrounds.
Yep. So that's great. I think you all just shared a number of different practical ways that each person that's attending can think about how to engage diversity, but also once you actually identify talent, how to keep nurturing them and also providing them with opportunities, whether at your firm or elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious, Dana, just a question. So diversity expands across a number of spectrums. Are there things that you're doing within the firm that are very intentional about embracing diversity and inclusion and equity and making it a priority for your firm?
Yes, I mean, we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee that is very focused, of which I'm a member of. And then we do an annual review with our board of our progress. So we have, focus of the top level of the firm. And as people were saying, tone of the top really matters. And then we do employee surveys to make sure we're getting it right. And if we're not, get that feedback and try to make adjustments based on sort of employees on the ground. They're seeing a lot more than we're seeing many times. Then we're doing a lot around education. Team decision making is really important at our firm, and we want to make sure that we're getting the most out of our teams. And so we've brought in various experts, academics, and researchers in to do educational sessions for our teams. One example is Cass Sunstein at Harvard, who wrote the book called Wiser, Getting Beyond Groupthink, to help groups make better decisions. We brought in Lori McKenzie of Stanford, a Clayman Institute for Gender Research, to talk about unconscious bias and do training sessions for our employees. And then we're participating a great deal in industry groups so that we're sharing what we're doing, but also learning from others. And some of those are the ICI's D&I working group, the U.S. Institute's Diversity Initiative, Bloomberg's Diversity Initiative. So we're trying to not say we have all the answers, but try to keep getting better and embrace continuous learning in this very important area. And then we've always done a lot in the community, and I think it has a win-win in the sense that it's a great team building for your own firm. We do a lot of volunteering in our community, boys and girls clubs and other areas. And we also do a lot of charitable giving in this area. And we do a matching program so that our employees can pick organizations of their choice, but we try to support and encourage charitable giving by our employees so that they sort of embrace the broader society and in areas of their passion. And so these are all things we've done for a long time, and we're using the input from our employees and our DEI&I committee to look for further areas of emphasis for the firm to keep trying to get better.
Great. And Dana, I love that you mentioned some of the industry organizations, because it does appear that the industry is a brand opportunity with both the communities we serve and the candidates we want to hire. And the other thing that's going to happen, or is happening already, is that competition to hire qualified, diverse candidates is increasing. And I try to argue that it's not about us trying to, sort of poach each other's talent, and as much as expanding the number of diverse, talented people that are part of the industry. So
one thing I forgot to mention that I think is really important, I think others mentioned, is partnering with key organizations like the Ron Brown Leadership Network, Girls Who Invest. There's a lot of groups that are very focused on educating people about our industry and encouraging diverse talent in our industry. And I think those can be very fruitful for finding really talented, motivated young people. The other thing I would mention is that we hire typically out of undergrad for our research associate program and the investment side. And so those are people just post undergrad. And there's a lot of great case competitions that are in place. And so we sponsor those and speak at those and maybe participate in judging. And we do some on our own and some with the industry, but there's one Cornell Women in Investing conference that we think is attracting really talented young women that are interested in our industry as well. So I think there's a lot of ways to get involved with what works for your firm as a way to both find and encourage, just and help the industry find and encourage more diverse talent.
And obviously, Wendy, for us, meaning I'm sure it's the same with Brown and Ariel, and of course here at Garcia Hamilton. I mean, it's easy because we are who we are. And so if you look, the vast majority of our whole workforce are either minorities or women. If you look at the 13 partners, 10 are either minorities or women. And so, for us, it's just a natural, because it is who we are.
Yeah, agreed. So we have two questions in the Q&A that I want to make sure we get to. So first of all, thank you for those who've submitted questions. We tried to answer a couple as we were going along. But one question that I'm going to throw out, I think I'm going to throw this one to Keith. So considering the environment we are now in, intention and purposeful change are absolutely necessary. While companies acknowledge that change is needed, there may not be action items on the agenda. How would you deal with apathy?
Oh, great question. I think apathy in this regard really hurts, obviously, the organization. And so I think you have the way to confront it is internally. You know, I always say that the fish rots from the head first. So one of the best ways, I think, of getting people's attention within an organization is leadership saying, this is important to us. This is not who we are, but who we want to be. And this is how we're going to get there. And so it really is impacting most aspects of culture of an organization. And, you know, change is difficult, change is slow, but then you have to align your goals with, you know, making those changes with incentives, right? And in terms of the evaluation process, compensation process. And then I think you have to provide mile markers to say, listen, let us not forget our long-term goal, but this is where we are versus where we said we would be in this. And it's ongoing, it's daily. It has to resonate in the language of the cultures, in our words, in our actions on a daily basis. It's not something that you can just do periodically and expect to make these types of changes.
Yeah, agreed. So someone in the audience shared that many of the comments today sound commonsensible, right? So obvious. And yet, you know, they're wondering about what is the role of public policy? What legislative policies need to change so that the suggestions today have a higher likelihood of becoming commonplace? So I know that there are a few people on this panel that are very passionate and actively involved with public policy. So I'll start with John and then ask Gil to round that out.
I would just sort of say, and then I know Gil will round it out very well, is that what we're missing is what we had literally 40 years ago. Roughly 40 years ago, Maynard Jackson was the mayor of Atlanta, Harold Washington in Chicago, we had Coleman Young in Detroit, Marion Barry in DC, and these diverse mayors fought for economic justice every single day. There are stories about Maynard Jackson realizing there were no African Americans on the bank boards in Atlanta, bringing in all the bank presidents and saying, if you guys don't have someone diverse soon, you're going to lose all opportunity to do business here in Atlanta. When investment bankers came to do business in Chicago, Harold Washington said, if you don't have a team that looks like Chicago, you're not going to be included. And all of a sudden, Drexel Burnham and Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch found their first investment bankers. And many of those folks now are the leaders in our community, either partners in major firms or they've started their own firms. You know, the Jim Rimmels of the world, the Chris Williams of the world, the Ron Blaylocks got their started because those progressive mayors insisted that diversity mattered. So I think we need to get back to that. We need to get political leaders, like I mentioned earlier, Joyce Beatty or Maxine Waters, who understands that if we don't have a strong Black and brown business community that's going to nurture talent, be involved in the community, be role models, you're not going to get anywhere. And so we have to get back to that and have every anchor institution in our community live the values of Maynard and Harold and other dynamic leaders who believed in us and understood that economic justice was important. Dr. King understood that great late in his life. And he talked about progressive white Americans deplore prejudice, but accept or ignore economic injustice. So we need that kind of political leadership that's not going to accept economic justice anymore. And the things that they come up with from a legal standpoint, it's not only what they put in legislation, but it's their moral authority to do what Maynard and Harold did a generation ago.
Can I jump in, Wendy?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good. Thank you. Well, look, John is very, eloquent in his language. I'm at the end of the day, those that are apathetic or passive or whatever, times are changing. It behooves them to get ahead of the curve because legislative change is going to happen. If you look historically, whenever there's been unjust things, when there's been unfair economics, there's always been legislation. It's going to happen. Whether it happens at the federal level, it's happened in Illinois, whether it happens in New York, New Jersey, and some of the obstacles like Prop 209 in California, I predict that's going to fall in November because I think people are recognizing the terrible ramifications that have come out of it. And so legislation will come, and if legislation doesn't come, there will be regulatory relief. And what do I mean by relief? It's very simple. The more we shine the light, the more there's transparency, the more it will make people change. And what an interesting thing. John just rattled off all these great mayors. If you look today, there are far fewer minority mayors. And if you look, one of the things that happened was legislation by the SEC that limited or effectively banned political contributions. And at the end of the day, why our industry? Why not all these other industries but ours? Was that an intentional thing to keep minorities and women out of this industry? Was it a barrier of entry? At the end of the day, it should be our First Amendment right to be able to support those candidates that are like-minded like us that want to see opportunity for everyone distributed equally. So I hope that's something that the SEC will change.
Well said. It's terrific.
Fantastic. So I know we're getting close on time, which I can't believe, and I want to make sure that we leave everyone with actionable items or things that are top of mind that really continues the urgency and maintains the momentum on this important work in our industry and, quite frankly, in the broader community at large. So we're all looking forward to getting back to some state of normal, whatever that might be. I don't even know if normal is the right word. How can we collectively ensure that we don't take our eye off the ball? Dana, do you want to get us started?
Yes, I think events like this are really important just for spotlighting the issue. So again, very appreciative of the IAA and for my fellow participants. I would say that one, make sure it's an important and spotlighted issue inside your firm, and that it's a priority, and that you have both formal and informal processes to keep it front and center. Then there's so many ways to get involved in the industry and support the industry. And I think we rattled off a few of them, but there's many ways for people that to be leaders in this industry, in attracting top talent to our industry. And then I think, as we mentioned, have concrete things that make sure that you have an inclusive environment, and that you do that through whatever means works for your own culture, but surveys, town halls, make sure that you're getting, ways for your employees to give feedback on where ways that the culture is working and ways that the culture can improve and make it an inclusive environment. Of course, stay very focused on fair pay, and make sure there's an independent look at your pay work, and then how maybe even external looks at your employee base in terms of making sure that you have robust processes. So I would say those were some key things that I wanted to highlight. I'm sure others will have others.
Great. Thank you, Dana. Gil?
I'm going to say that John Lewis quote again, because it's so powerful, right? He said, when you see something that is not right, not just, not fair, you have a moral obligation to say something, to do something. Our children and their children will ask, what did you do? What did you say? So be willing to ask questions. When you see things that don't make sense, speak out. Just do the right thing. That will really do so much for society as a whole. Do it respectfully, do it thoughtfully. We can all agree to disagree, but let's agree to disagree thoughtfully. But my view is do the right thing, say something, and believe me, if you're a money manager, ask your consultant. Just very simple. In the last couple of years, equities and fixed income, how many searches have you had? How many minority firms made the finals and how many were hired? And don't give me numbers that are inflated because it was Illinois, it was mandated. You can have all the connects, you can have all the webinars and all those things. You can have a zillion managers in your database. But the key is, are you being sincere? And are you really looking to broaden your roster of managers and to really do the right thing by your clients to source alpha?
I'll follow up on Gilbert's point because he mentioned John Lewis, and we have a conference every year for African Americans and more Latino directors that we started 17 years ago with our partners at Russell Reynolds. Now Deloitte's our partner. The hypothesis of the conference was that many of us that are sort of pioneers in our industries early on corporate boards get into the boardroom and get quiet and shy and don't fight for economic justice once we're in the boardroom. So every year we have what's called the conscience of the conference. So we've had Harry Belafonte, Dr. King's best friend. We've had Andy Young, former ambassador, mayor of Atlanta. We had John Lewis one year. We've had President Obama, Valerie Jarrett. But the idea there is for people like that to come and inspire directors to understand there was so much sacrificed to get these doors open for us. And if we don't speak out and fight for justice, in the quote that Gilbert used, we're never going to make progress. Because unfortunately, white America, they've got full agendas. They're not thinking about the unfairness of how money is being spent, what kind of economic opportunities are coming out of foundations or universities or nonprofits. So all of us that are fortunate enough to be in these leadership roles, I think we all have a responsibility to stand up, fight for us. It's a moral responsibility to do this if we care about economic justice and we care about this wealth gap that's getting much, much worse in our country. The one answer can't be just letting it go the way it's always gone and all the economic opportunities going traditionally to white males and their firms.
Fantastic. So Keith, round us out.
I wish I could end it as eloquently as the other panelists have stated it, but it's more of what has already been said. We have to do more. It's an ongoing battle. It's an ongoing fight. We know that. And we just have to keep up the fight. But we all have to do something. We all have to commit to doing something to get out, to reach someone, to bring younger people into the industry, to call a consultant to the mat on their behavior for what they're not doing. Encouraging clients, whether it's foundations or endowments or pension funds, to question their own behavior as to why they don't have more minority representation in their funds. And investment managers, majority investment managers, why don't you have more diversity in your research, in your portfolio managers? We have to demand that. Change will not occur without us demanding it.
Absolutely. Well, the time has flown by. We could probably continue here for at least another hour on this topic. And it's really been an honor and a privilege for me to be part of this conversation with you all today. Thank you so much, Dana, Gil, Keith, and John, for participating and sharing. I'm so much more encouraged about the future of our industry. You've given us very practical tips to follow. And special thanks to the Investment Advisor Association for providing the forum for us to gather and share best practices and really talk about what's needed to advance the future of our investment industry. Thank you all for joining and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All of us.
Pleasure. Thank you.